Hello there. Today I will be presenting my Psychology 338 Character Analysis final project. I will be analyzing the personality of Tohru Honda from Fruits Basket using 3 personality theories that we've discussed throughout Psychology 338. The 3 theories I chose to focus on today are Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, Carl Jung's analytical theory, and Carl Rogers' humanistic person-centered theory. My objective today is to demonstrate how each theory explains Tohru's personality overall in varying ways, and highlight how different psychological perspectives focus on different aspects of an individual's personality. Tohru Honda is the main character of Fruits Basket, an anime originating from Japanese author Natsuki Takaya. Tohru is known for being kind, gentle, caring, and emotionally supportive, and extremely self-sacrificing. She often puts other people above herself, and will always do her best to help those around her. At first, she may seem like a dreadfully boring Mother Teresa character, but when we search below the surface, it is clear that Tohru's motivating factors behind her personality are far from trivial or expected. Her kindness and tendency towards subservience comes from inner conflict pertaining to grief, suppressed emotions, and struggles with her own self-worth. Here, we see how the show animators have clearly illustrated the incongruence between her grieving personality and the outward sunshine personality that she portrays. Freud believed that personality is shaped by the unconscious conflict, childhood experiences, and constant interaction between the id, ego, and superego. The id is the part of an individual that is driven by instinct and immediate needs, such as shelter, food, health, and perceived safety. The ego is the mediator between the id and superego, the middleman that attempts to balance perceived reality and actual reality. It is also responsible for making practical decisions. The superego represents morality, guilt, and internal interpretations of what is considered right or wrong, and an individual's moral compass. Freud also believed that defense mechanisms arose to protect people from their own emotional pain or anxiety stemming from experiences with trauma and the conflict between the id and superego. When we apply this theory to Tohru Honda, one of the clearest things we see is that her superego is very potent. She constantly feels responsible for others around her, opting to be the caregiver rather than the cared for. She feels immense guilt when even thinking about being a burden to others, and refuses help due to these feelings. She strives to be morally good, goes out of her way to do the hard thing, whatever she thinks is right, and will help others despite her own challenges, mostly ignoring her own needs for the sake of others. For example, after Tohru's mother, Kyoko, dies in a sudden accident, Tohru opts to reside within a tent in the middle of a forested area instead of asking to live with either of her 2 best friends, for fear of being a nuisance to them and their families. From a Freudian perspective, this can be viewed as the superego crushing out the id as she ignores her own basic needs for shelter and normalcy, and pushes herself to firmly stand behind believing that her burdening her loved ones would be the wrong thing for her to do, despite the situation. Even though asking for help would be the practical thing, she allows guilt to guide her actions instead. We see her struggle and have moments of realization where her ego pushes through, trying to find compromise between her needs and feelings. The ego attempts to manage everyday life in her new life, but her superego is so dominant that it pushes her towards self-sacrifice. Another important Freudian concept is repression, meaning to push one's painful thoughts and feelings that bring us discomfort into the unconscious mind, a defense mechanism. Tohru experiences a huge emotional strain and difficult loss when her mother suddenly dies in an accident, but she rarely expresses her sadness and anger around others or in general due to her repression. We often see her comforting herself in private and denying sadness in front of others in order to protect their feelings. She stays cheerful and focuses on helping others as well as directing her actions towards what she believes her mother would have wanted for her. Freud might argue that her grief has not faded in these instances of moral strength, but rather that it is being intentionally suppressed in order to move forward. The pain still directly influences her actions, even if she doesn't overtly acknowledge it or let it show. Another defense mechanism that may apply is reaction formation. This happens when an individual behaves in the opposite way of how they truly feel inside. So, if Tohru feels insecure, sadness, fear, or loneliness, she may respond by acting overly positive, gentle, and supportive with others. Instead of showing pain externally, she transforms it into a kind of nurturing personality that she is praised for. Freud would likely say that Tohru's personality is shaped by her unconscious grief, guilt, and internal conflicts between her emotional needs and her moral rules and standards that she has developed for herself. It is safe to say that Tohru's self-perception is far from how she is perceived by others, who constantly tell her that she works too hard and does too much for others. So from this perspective, her kindness is real, but is also connected to her unresolved trauma. Jung agreed with Freud in the sense that the unconscious mind is important in order to determine personality, but he focused less on drives and conflict and more on identity, symbols, and psychological balance. Some key Jungian concepts are the persona, the shadow, archetypes, and individuation. The persona is the version of the self that we present to the world, the chosen behaviors and the moderated actions and patterns, whereas the shadow involves the parts of oneself that we hide away, deny, or do not fully accept. Jung believed that the healthy development occurs when an individual begins to recognize and integrate these hidden parts of themselves. When we apply Jung's theory to Tohru Honda, her cheerful and caring personality can be understood as her persona, the ideal self that she pushes to the surface in her interactions. This is the identity that she presents humbly to everyone around her: polite, well-mannered, optimistic, and supportive. This is how the people who know her perceive her. But Jung would ask, what is hidden behind the persona? The shadow. Tohru's shadow includes grief, feelings of loneliness, fear of abandonment, anger, and emotional exhaustion. These feelings are not always visible because she has worked hard to maintain her persona. A strong example of this concept Jung describes is how Tohru is capable of comforting others while being in despair herself. Outwardly, she portrays emotional stability, but inwardly, she carries her pain as well as others without stopping to ask for help for herself. Jung would argue that her shadow does not disappear just because Tohru wishes to hide it away. It remains a part of her personality, whether she acknowledges it or not. Another Jungian idea is the archetype, universal patterns of personality found across different cultures. Tohru is best described by the caregiver or great mother archetype in that she is compassionate, protective, nurturing, and focuses her energy on healing others. All of this gives her joy and comforts her. She becomes the mother she lost for others, all the while missing that in return. Being an emotional crutch for multiple members of the Soma family, as well as her two best friends. The caregiving aspect of Tohru's personality isn't explicitly negative. However, Jung would also point out how over-identifying with one archetype can become unhealthy for an individual. If Tohru solely exists as the caregiver, she will continue to neglect her own emotional needs. Jung prefaced the need for individuation as a necessity for psychological balance, becoming a whole by accepting every side of oneself. As the story develops, Tohru slowly becomes more honest about her feelings and needs with herself and with those around her, slowly but surely learning to accept her own faults through her interactions with those she cares for. That growth suggests moving towards individuation, certainly steps in the right direction in Jung's perspective. In his perspective, Tohru's personality is molded by the tension between her persona and her shadow. Unlike Freud and Jung, Rogers found himself focused less on the unconscious conflicts and more on personal growth, self-worth, and potential. Rogers believed that people have a natural inclination towards growth and developing into their best selves, but this, as he points out, is entirely dependent on whether or not that individual receives the acceptance and support necessary for that growth. Tohru displays unconditional positive regard to anyone she meets, consistently. She accepts those around her with kindness, even when they are mean, guarded, or otherwise emotionally damaged. She sees the value in anyone she meets, even when they cannot see it in themselves. This is one of her strongest traits. Regardless, the issue is that she doesn't regard herself in the same way, often diminishing herself and being self-critical despite how others view her. Her ideal self appears to be someone who is always happy, always wanted, helpful, and never a burden to others. But her true self is someone who is grieving, slightly depressive, vulnerable, and in desperate need of support. Because of that gap, she experiences incongruence, because her ideal self and real self do not line up with each other, which creates distress and low self-worth. She may believe that in order to deserve the love that she receives, she must always be useful to others, constantly trying to pick up the slack or mediate other people's lives for them. Rogers would say that Tohru's growth depends entirely on her learning that she has value even when she is struggling. She doesn't need to earn the love she receives through constant self-sacrifice. As the story progresses, so does Tohru's self-acceptance, allowing herself to be taken care of and confronting her grief piece by piece. She reflects personal growth and movement towards greater congruence. So, from Rogers' perspective, Tohru's personality is not centrally about hidden conflict, but a reflection of her struggles and overall journey with acceptance and becoming her authentic self. Even though each theory analyzes the same behaviors, each one asks very different questions. What inner conflict is driving this behavior? What parts of the self are hidden or unbalanced? Is this person able to be their true self, or are they living under conditions of worth? That is why personality psychology can be so useful. Different theories reveal and give insight to different layers of the same person. Tohru Honda is much more than just a typical kind character. Together, these theories show how personality is complex and can be understood in various ways depending on the perspective used. In conclusion, Tohru's kind personality is indeed genuine, but it is also shaped by pain, identity, and growth. As a final note, I'd like to draw your attention back to this image. Used in the closing credits of Season 2, the symbolism here really ties Tohru into a neat little bow. Sunflowers represent loyalty, adoration, and overall just positivity. The sunflower is known for being a happy flower, fitting to brighten up someone's mood, which fits her perfectly. Thank you for listening.